something that we will return to is topos and motif and what it means to be able to read. This is something that Heidegger addressed when reading Hölderlin's poem, the hymn Andenken. Souvenir is how it's translated into French, or remembrance in English. So, for Heidegger, reading the great poet Hölderlin, have you heard of Hölderlin? Okay. We need to establish the let's say the stipulations and rules and contractual agreements of our encounter. You need to ask if there's a word that you don't understand. Your comrades will be grateful. You need to feel free to pause. If you feel you have been listening authentically, to use the language that I just evoked through the name of Heidegger, I would appreciate if you thought with me. In other words, it's of no value in terms of what we're trying to achieve if there are kind of break-ins and entries that come from unlocatable spaces of internal dialogue, if you understand what I mean. Let's try to build something together. We're here to work together, to listen, to open our ears, and to consider philosophically, theoretically, and in terms of the exigencies of thinking, what we are doing when we even say we. Okay? So I would like to establish or re-inscribe the contract that binds us. There's no encounter without a contractual agreement, by the way. There's no encounter that can claim to have rid itself of some relation to the law. This is something that will engage us throughout our work together. Let's just play with that momentarily. What do you suppose the contractual stipulations are that allow us to even be here in this moment prior to any so-called teaching or learning? We are already submitted to the law, and tell me what you think the contractual, at least implications are of our being here. What are some of the rules that we have already signed off on, meaning you've already offered your signature and your submission in certain ways? And we will discuss these terms. We'll also discuss the masochistic track of a politics, of a pedagogy, of what I would call an edipedagogy. Edipedagogy, you hear the name of Oedipus, and we can discuss that in terms of what happened or didn't happen, or failed to happen, or will have happened, or is still about to happen concerning yesterday's event or non-event, or disruption or non-disruption. So the key term in pedagogy is one of transference. What happens in your relation to the one who speaks? There's always already a binding transferential contract that you've signed on to. It can be, God forbid, a negative transference where you can't stand the one who occupies this space. The one who occupies this space in Lacan's, the French psychoanalyst Lacan's vocabulary and lexicon, is the sujet supposé savoir. Have you heard that before? The subject supposed to know. The subject supposed to know is practically only a spatial determination. Who takes that chair? It doesn't, subject supposé savoir. please. This is something that was considered, yesterday, when Mr. Bergen was talking about the effects of subjectivity, like what creates a subject. The person who occupies, or the being, it's not clear it's a person, it might be just a function, who occupies this space is already given a kind of transferential credit line. You will credit that being with having knowledge to transmit. And that already suggests a scenography of transferential intensity. Now, you may be resisting that, you may want to reject it, you may want to think you're not already implicated and inscribed by it, but nonetheless, this is something we want to consider. So pedagogy has something to do with the way learning takes place or necessarily falters. When does a teaching arrive? It may arrive in 5 years. Send me a postcard when it does, please. It may arrive in a dream, in the unconscious field of receptivity. You may have a nightmare or a dream that opens up the other scene, as Freud called it, of what was taking place or didn't take place in immediacy. This was something that was brought up last night, namely the postponement, the après-coup, or in German, in Freud's German, Nachträglichkeit. Okay, can you write that on the board for us, please? Nachträglichkeit. This is in the Freudian vocabulary, and we are building a vocabulary list, so I urge you to write things down, prepare for the next day, because I'm trying to build a language and a dwelling for us in which to be sheltered. And it is like a foreign language, and I don't have subtitles yet, but we are learning and unlearning at the same time. So Nachträglichkeit is postponement, or the après-coup, which is essential to contemporary thought, which is to say that things, I'm just saying things now, do not occur in the immediacy of an occurrence, but get reconstituted or depend upon the delivery of meaning. They depend upon a lag, a lapse, and the act of remembering and reconstituting or constructing the very meaning that you think you have access to, but never arrives in the present. It will have been an event, for example. And note this tense, which is the future anterior, very important for Derrida, especially. It will have been this or that. So it will have been is the future, and then the past. Something will have happened. And in terms of that kind of tense, of the future anterior, meaning it's future and backwards simultaneously, I am issuing a promissory note, meaning to state that you will have understood what I am talking about. You may now be a little confounded, worried. Anxiety, by the way, is extremely important. It's a principal category for Heidegger's being and time, Sein und Zeit. Sorge is the word. Maybe you can, do you mind? Are you in the mood for athletics? Good. In Heidegger's being and time, Sein und Zeit, Sorge, anxiety, or sometimes it's translated as care, which is a fundamental ontological mood. Sorge, anxiety, is what opens you up to understanding, or to the possibility of understanding. Sorge, anxiety, or care, is disclosive. If you're anxious, if one, or Dasein, this is something we'll get to at another point, is anxious, one is anxious, that is a temporal pitch, it's an Einstellung or attitude, it's an opening to the other, to world, and it's what allows for understanding. Anxiety is the leading mood, let's call it momentarily, because what is anxiety? According to psychoanalysis, anxiety allows itself to be opposed to fear. Do you know what the difference is for psychoanalysis between anxiety and fear? And you'll say your name when you speak, unless you don't want to. It's a very violent thing. To ask for the name in Derrida's work on hospitality is also a police gesture. Or in the hospital, they'll say, do you know your name? Do you know where you are? This is what today's topic is. Do you know your name and do you know where you are? But to ask for your name is already an intrusive phenomenon. It's policing. And therefore, you can make up a name, you can refuse, or you can offer us the gift of allowing us to call you by a name of your choosing. I wanted to change my name to Strong Oak at one point. And people said, you know, your name's kind of that already. That's, you know.
There's not that long space between asking me my name and letting me answer. There's not that anxiety.
Very good.
My name is Chris.
Chris.
The name I was thinking for.
Okay.
Yeah, well...
Wait, was it the name you were given at birth?
Christopher.
Aha, he's lying. Caught you. And we will talk, and it's a Heideggerian issue, what abbreviations mean. For Heidegger, the abbreviation is already an effect of technology. CIA, FBI, in Germany, Freie Universität, MIU, EGS, etc. Chris. So what does it mean to cut down a name? I have a weird name. Let me introduce myself, Avital Ronell. And people tend to abbreviate it and prefer it. It's very American to go for the Avi, and which is also a boy's name, right, in Hebrew. So very interesting need to abbreviate names. That we're going to be attentive to everything. Everything falls under the purview of our philosophical scanners and intensities here. Everything also that resists. I don't want you to just say, have the Beavis and Butthead kind of literary theory relationship of it sucks or it's good or something. We're going to reflect on everything. If you feel something sucks, big one, then let's understand and read why and where it resists, because we're going to read ourselves reading. We're going to see where it resists, where something moves, where something takes the off-ramp, and so on and so forth. And I was so pleased that you said it caused you anxiety that in a sadistic way, I thought, oh, let me draw this out. Here, please. See how much I get, how badly I can harm you.
According to Freud, fear has no object. Anxiety does not.
Okay.
But not according to Lacan.
What does Lacan say?
That the object of anxiety is the object of the I, which is not really an object. But
So, kind of, yes, no, yeah, very good, very nice. So, as Chris rightly says, Freud distinguishes between anxiety and fear. And if we were to write our dissertation on anxiety, and we wanted to include, which we rightly should, the Freudian legacy and the philosophical, let's say existential, post-existential legacy, you can't just jump from one register to the other. You'd have to really prep it and anchor it. Why are we talking about psychoanalysis? And then we're making the disjunctive move to philosophy. You can't just slalom down and mix things up. Nonetheless, I would like to offer you that possibility of understanding that these vocabularies precede us, define us, have written us up already, and therefore I won't refrain from moving from one register to another. Again, you are welcome to ask about such moves and to slow it down, to pause me, treat me like a TV, and work with me so that I'm not just working at warp speed. I want you to understand, believe it or not. I really do. Yes.
I have a question.
Your
Did
name?
you say, sorry, my name is Althea.
Thank you. Almost Alethea.
Almost Alethea.
Yeah.
When you were speaking about anxiety, and then you used, did you say care?
Yes.
And is that some, I'm confused about the relationship.
Good. Very good. Thank you. So let me clarify via Chris's intervention, which was very essential. It's essential that we understand that for psychoanalysis, even though Lacan then will nuance this, that anxiety is that which has no known object. It's kind of free-floating. When you're anxious, you don't say, it's not part of the syntagm or grammar of anxiety to say, I'm anxious about this or because of this. You have a non-knowledge, a rapport of non-knowledge to anxiety. Something is pressing on you. So eventually in Heideggerian, it's going to be your own finitude. I don't want to bring you bad news, but it has everything to do with Sterblichkeit and finitude. That anxiety kind of grabs hold of you. Some people claim not to know what anxiety is. Is that the case here? Do you all know what we're talking about? Kind of. Thank you. So anxiety is said not to have a known object. You can't have recourse, or you don't have recourse to that kind of ultimately more or less reassuring knowledge that you know why you're anxious. It's just women have this routinely when they have their periods, this kind of anxiety, and it's physiologically triggered. So are they closer to a kind of Heideggerian tightness with regard to being or not? Now I threw that in a little bit to scandalize, but also to make an announcement that we will also be reading the many bodies and corporealities that philosophy does or does not avoid. So, and we will also obviously consider the mark of gender and such questions as to whether anxiety can be gendered or not, and if that's foolish or not, but I just want to start our menus right now. Yes?
My name's Nico, but not given it was Nicholas at first, but that wasn't the choice of my parents either. The PTA, I don't understand it if this is I've never quite been able to grasp it, and if this is the correct moment.
Okay, let me hold on to, unless Chris has a fast answer.
What does it do with your imaginary philosophy? No, I mean, it's, yeah, I don't know how to describe it quickly.
We will.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Nico, whose parents had no choice in the name. That's very interesting. Are they your parents?
They are my parents, yeah.
Okay.
The dictator Franco.
Okay. I just had the dictator, my father. Okay. So let me let us, thank you, that it's very essential that we understand the barely understandable residue that of desire, and as desire that the petit a, the little a, has in Lacanian algorithms and discourse of desire, in the field of desire. We'll get back to that. So right now, we're with the distinction maintained in psychoanalysis between fear and anxiety. Fear, on the other hand, is said to, when you're fearful, you know why you're afraid. Someone's about to mow you down. You may not have the money for your rent. You have an object triggering the fear. You have a sentence that you can insert, giving you knowledge about the cause of your fear. But anxiety is more free-floating, and we're not going to decide which is more intense, because that would be foolish. Fear would be, could be a political fear, that you're about to be busted or in some way oppressed, and so on and so forth. So for Heidegger, anxiety is a fundamental modality of being. It's an openness. It's what understanding depends upon, but it's also translated, as we said, and you asked about, as care, because Zalga is not exactly what you say in English, angst. It's a movement and a mood. It's hard to pin it down to what it is, and that's something that will interest us as well. Of being in the world, which is to say, once you're thrown into the world, you have a relation to the extent that you have a relation, which is part of Mitsein, being with, of care. That's what propels you, and it's propelled by your finitude. We will get to all of that. Let me just say that for Heidegger, and this is a break with Cartesian habits, this is something that, has anyone studied with Jean-Luc Nancy here? Not yet. Yeah, you have. Mitsein is the primary motor. Mitsein is being with. This is a break with the Cartesian habit of the ergo sum, okay? Let me just say much too quickly, it's shorthand, and once we have a text in common, we can work together, and you'll see how things work and break down. Their itineraries are always more complicated than you can imagine, and we have to be very attentive. So the Cartesian habit, and this is very important, of first positing a self or an I that then attaches and then relates to world after it's a self-assertion, is broken down and rejected by Heidegger, because he begins with the fundamental facticity of Mitsein. Being is what we share. You start out sharing. You start out in a relation of the with. We are with the other. We are with, so that you also owe yourself to the other. You owe yourself to, you start out, and this is something that Freud, even Goethe, and others have marked and noticed, that one starts out indebted to the other, be it indebted to the parents, be it indebted, in Shakespeare, read by Goethe, to nature. You do not start out as some sovereign, autonomous, here I am kind of being, but you start out already owing to the other, or already in relation. Later on, we'll discuss the marvelous problem of the without. Now we're talking about with, but without is very rich and something we want to consider, because in English, as you hear it, the without, in other words, the word of deprivation, malting, loss, starts with a with. So to be without begins with with. And we need to read the with because we are with each other. Are you with me? So let us consider that possibility. Now to return to the contract that I began with and I initiated and asked for co-signatory attention for. What are some of the contractual agreements that we have already signed on to just to be here and to be talking in this way? Let's just jam a little and to understand, because one of the gestures, this isn't arbitrary or a whim or a caprice on my part. One of the gestures of contemporary philosophical thought is to situate the place of utterance or enunciation. Don't just barge into a space and leave it unread and unfigured. Everything is already highly semiotically charged. You know what semiotics is? Okay. So everything is already signifying everything. And we want, as I'm here to be your coach, your trainer, your mentor, if you want, your teacher, which is to say, everything has to come under the purview of its unreadability. I'm not saying everything is readable. It's fundamentally unreadable. Everything is unreadable, which is why we have to struggle to read. If everything were transparent, immediate, legible, we wouldn't be here. Okay? So it's a gesture absolutely considered, and perhaps rightly so, unavoidable, unbypassable, to situate the place of a learning and utterance and the way we're throwing cables to each other. Not only in terms of transferential intensities, which I will continue to explain, but also to understand that if I were speaking this way in the Port Authority in New York, I would be hauled off, right? So it does matter where language is emitted. It does matter, and it would be perhaps a performance piece. And I did want to do that when I was a professor at Berkeley. I signed up to give lectures in Port Authority. Well, people were just inattentive and so on. Then I realized I was giving lectures in Port Authority. But anyway, the site and situation calls upon us to read it. I will read with you what these alpine, sublime encroachments mean and what it means to be working here together. But first, right now, I'm talking about a relation to law which one never evades, but also our contracts. What are some of our contractual agreements that allow us to even be here? This is very banal. I just wanted to start our conversation today. What I want you to see to what extent we are already subject to law and to a law of the place. What are some of the agreements that you have already signed on to? Yes, and your name, please.
Cecilia.
Hi, Cecilia.
It seems like there are tons of them. Like first, to agree to apply and to do whatever it took to apply, then to agree to talk to Wolfgang about it, then to push the yes button, then to look for money, then to agree to whatever the money was, then to get airfare.
Absolutely.
And all it seems like step by step.
So there's a whole list
like
of
the whole
material efforts that you've had to submit to and agree to. Absolutely. So this isn't a free space on any level. What about that which brings you here to this space today? What kind of agreements have you signed on for?
It's a submission to authority, not just the the pedagogical authority, but the authority of the crowd of classmates, an authority to respect, I suppose,
Right.
on some level.
So even a quasi-moral, when this is something we'll discuss, attitude has had to be, you have to suit up with respect for some sort of authority, let's say the phallus of knowledge, and then you rightly say respect, which is a Kantian, a very important Kantian notion, which also implies respect implies distance. For some it's too cold, respect, but that's correct, respect. But how does respect get manifest? I'm not going crazy, oh maybe I am, but there's also a fly. So how does respect get manifest or enacted? What are some of the rules that you've internalized and your superegos have forced upon you before you even walked up the mountain? Yes.
To listen, to be quiet.
Yes, there's the very violent decision to stifle something. Some of you are certainly libidinally outfitted to speak, to act, to inscribe, to write up your worlds, to rewrite, to reformat, to intervene. So you have signed on and agreed to shut up while I speak. That's already enormous. And you've agreed in Foucauldian terms to be docile bodies, right? You all sat down. I didn't ask you to sit down. I did ask you to come closer.
In some ways, it feels like, since implicitly, I think, everything we're talking is implicit. I think we all feel like this is, in some ways, an experimental space, and a lot of these rules of the classroom we all internalize to quasi-suspended.
Right. That's why, thank you, Chris. This is the assistance I need, because you're absolutely right. I forgot to say why we're even doing this exercise, because we think we are in a free experimental space, which I will not dispute. Nonetheless, superego has steered you in such a way that most of you are sitting upright, are in the pose and position of quasi-submission or total submission, which I love. But, there's things, I didn't ask you to sit down, I didn't ask you to be silent, I didn't ask your bodies to be strapped in, I didn't ask you to wear clothing. There's all sorts of things that you've decided, and semiotically, you made decisions, as did I, as you can see, as to how to present yourself textually, how to beam information, right? You're all information systems. What isn't here? No one's wearing a suit except for my reinscription of the suit, right? What if someone came in with a suit and, Wall Street look? That would be absolutely breaking a code. Now we're talking about codes, rules, laws, and so on, and what makes it possible for us to even talk to each other. These are the conditions for the possibility of our being here. And this will be a question. What would a genuinely experimental site require? See, I'm still in the language of requirement. Can one get out of it? Can one only negotiate at its limits? And so on and so forth. You've made many decisions and signed up in many ways, semiotically, in terms of self-presentation, in terms of the ritual of domination and so on, maybe not bondage yet, but that's still a binding contract that we'll discuss. So all sorts of things have preceded the possibility of our speaking to one another. Yes?
Ashkan is my name. I think one thing that I'm noticing is the negotiations one makes with time. So to be here somehow requires to take time out, or to also switch your sense of time in relation to the practicalities of time. structure of the seminar, but also in kind of these different speeds and durations that when your work here also overlaps with work that's coming before or work that's coming after, this time zone zapping.
It's very important, and I'm thankful that you bring it up, because we are also negotiating with a distinction that Heidegger makes, say, between the Antic and the Ontological. Do you know the difference between Antic and Ontological? Let's just say very quickly, as we did for the Petita, and then we'll dive into these descriptions when we have a text at hand. So the Antic would be something like, what time is it? You look at your watch. It's banal, trivial, daily, quotidian, material, something that's graspable. Ontological is if I say, what time is it? And you have an ontological kind of anxiety to stay with. It's about your being. It's about the relation, the logic or alogic of being to a question. So these are distinctions that we want to retain, and you're absolutely right that you're asked to switch time zones or relation to time and to enter a different kind of temporality or different kinds of temporalities. And jet lag isn't just, we were already talking about lag, and we will talk about the exhaustion of metaphysics one of these days. So you're absolutely right to alert us to a relation to time that is imposed but also disinstalled. You're asked to, in order to be authentically related to time, you're asked to forget time. And that's a bit of a paradox that we want to hang on to, that you're asked to forget time in order to take time and be in time, being time and being in time. So you're absolutely right that there's a relation to time, and also even in a more nano-structural sense. Are we slow? Are we fast? You know, we are proceeding at warp speed with all of these classes and texts, and also the rapid transferential turnover. You had one teacher, to the extent that you can have them, and now you have me today, then there'll be someone else. It's hardly imaginable that someone will succeed me, and there will be this transferential rapidity and vitesse kind of switch over that we need to question. Is learning possible? How much time does it take to hook onto the teacher, the teaching, let's say the teaching? How much time do you need to work through the difficult philosophical program that each teacher brings to, or each teaching brings to bear? So that's very good. Let me return now to the promissory note. So I want us to bear in mind that we are contractually already signing all sorts of pages and fine print that we haven't yet even begun to consider. But I think I mentioned you all decided to get dressed to come here. Who asked you to? There's a code or a rule or superego. Do you know superego, by the way? If you're here, you know very well who superego is. But do you know superego is part of the Freudian topology? The way I tried to read it at one point in one of my texts is Freud mentions that as a child he hated spinach. Because for a child, spinach, it's mucosity. Okay, I won't go over it. We all want to throw up. Did anyone love spinach? And I'm not talking the salad days of spinach. I'm talking when it was cooked. Did you love spinach?
I loved spinach.
Oh my God.
And I was made fun of a lot.
Yeah.
And I cried once.
You cried
Yeah.
because of your love for spinach?
Because I was in the cafeteria and all the kids were just like, ha 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 ha, like out of a cartoon.
Thank
I,
you.
I ran into
So you're
the
with me, yes.
I
so-
ran into the playground and burst into
So-
tears.
Oh. I will try to make up for that. But you know, so you were a baby perv, right? You were totally pervert because, and I say that lovingly. You know that that's a big compliment coming from me. So, ooh, I see this mask looking at me up there. Okay, so it was completely inassimilable, your mysterious love of spinach. At what age, if I may ask?
I think it was in the 3rd or 4th grade.
Okay, no, you were actually on schedule. They were lagging behind. You
But it
were
was, I think there was
advanced.
the cultural clash as well, because it was an elementary school in the States. But I have an Iranian background, so I mean the food is just totally different. So
So this is, you're saying this is a Western problem?
no, I just think that.
No, I'd be interested to know. But will you agree that their children have infantile repulsions? Does anyone disagree with that? But this is very interesting that you were ahead and this is, so, okay, we have one outstanding member of the community who actually proves the rule. Very good. So Freud mentions that he hated spinach when he was a child, a very little child, as do most children. There's something, and to eat here is very important. It's not extraneous to what we're talking about as teaching, because what is eating? What is the mouth even? It's a place that shares. Is it outside? Is it inside the mouth? Is it a threshold? Is it an opening? Is it a closing? Is it both? And other things. Incorporation, assimilation. A lot of thinking is hooked onto the metaphor of digestion. I can't digest that idea. Can you assimilate this lesson? Or, as Nietzsche, the great philosopher, taught us, Nietzsche was always throwing up. And that was a way of reversing dialectics, by the way. Nietzsche reversed dialectics by being the philosopher who needed to throw up. In other words, he's not going, and he loved the cows of Switzerland. Because why would Nietzsche love the cows? Hmm?
No, he talks about how the cows are so smart.
But how are they smart? Right. They ruminate. They have 4 stomachs. They ruminate. They have a relation to thought and pensiveness that is grounded, and they're not ranters, and so on and so forth. Nietzsche's zoology is another question. Heidegger's text, Nietzsche and his animals, is something we might want to address. Nietzsche had, Zarathustra had a snake around his, all the animals in Nietzsche. And Nietzsche went crazy when he saw that a horse was being beaten. Do you know this in Turin? Nietzsche threw his arms around a horse that was being beaten, and Nietzsche never came back to us. So his relation to animals is very essential for us in our thinking. In any case, what does it mean to eat? This is something I tried to consider in my work on drugs and dependency. What it means when you mourn the loss of something or someone, you internalize them, or you introject, or if you have a so-called mourning disorder, you incorporate the other, and the other is like a phantom agitating and remote controlling, agitating within you, because you can't digest the loss. We'll get to those crypt formations and phantom transmissions in our conversations. So, Freud said that as a child, he couldn't stand spinach. It was revolting. And then one day he noticed that he loved spinach. It was even promoted to one of his favorite vegetables. So I'm zooming in and wondering what happened. How is this possible? What happened is, spinach was arrived on the table of laws, as part of an utterance of injunction. Eat your spinach. That's a law, that's a command, right? Eat your spinach. And one day he internalized not only the spinach, but the law of the family. And this is the superego, part of the superegoical formation, which is that part of you that exercises authority. And you know from silly films that parody Germanicity, that there are those figures who, with a German accent, say, "We will make you enjoy," right? This is superego. Superego says in French, jouir, according to Lacan. In English, enjoy. You will enjoy this. You must enjoy. So jouissance, you have to love this. I'm going to make you swallow this and love it. This is superegoical. The day that you say, "Hey, I'm loving this. Give me more." You know, so what happens from the original moment of revulsion or "this is going to make me puke" to "I'm loving this, I need it, I want it." Superego got developed and the law got internalized, and you didn't need some external authority to say, "I want you to go to school. Why don't you add an extra school to your already overcrowded commitment schedule? Why don't you do more learning? Why don't you do more thinking?" And when I say more, I'm already thinking of Derrida's thinking and writing on mourning in terms of morsels, the morsels you swallow, the remorse you feel. We will get to all of this. The remorse, the morsels, and mort, death. So I'm saying more, more, more. I'm also thinking of the Lacanian signifier for woman's desire, which is encore, more, 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 which has everything to do with the death drive. Now I know I'm stuffing a lot of stuff in, and you may still be at the first level of wanting to puke because of the spinach that's being served.
Yes, Anne-Marie Alpha. So maybe we can see our contract as a superego machine, a way of transferring anxiety about good and evil into some very objective structure. I always love that quote from Barth that goes something like, "A contract exists so that people don't have to play devil or saint."
It is also a protection, mutual reciprocal protection. That's quite correct. So let us just understand that there are all sorts of contracts that we have signed, that we have agreed to, that both of us, reciprocal as structures, have submitted to already. But there's also the architectural space of where we find ourselves, what it's meant to signify, how we've organized ourselves, and all of this calls out for a certain kind of reading that I leave to your imagination unless you want to continue to discuss it. I just want to continue and finish issuing my promissory note, which is part of my contract, my part of the contract that I signed for you, which was stated in the future anterior, which is to say, you will have understood what we're doing here. Yes?
We're hovering around this contract, which I think has explicit and implicit content and gravity. I guess the question I have here is, how does the contract relate to hospitality? And is hospitality today, and also in the past, were they implicitly or explicitly or fundamentally also contractual?
Well, that's a very good question, but I'm going to ask you as a philosopher to motivate your bringing it, and to tell us your name, to motivate if you want. You can refuse. You can puke it out if you want. Withhold. So, to motivate this, I am your trainer, your personal coach, and so on and so forth. So if it's okay with you, I'll help you articulate and refine the way we speak to each other in this space, in this overdetermined space. So this is an excellent question, and all it needs is to be motivated. And it was quasi-motivated when you said contract, implicit, explicit, and then you just slip into hospitality. Now, was that referring to last night, to something else, to a discussion with Agamben, or do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean my and I feel that there's something missing in what we're discussing. And I think it goes beyond the implicit content of the contract. And I'm brought to Derrida's writing on hospitality.
Okay, you feel that there's something missing. I'm going to strike that out. That won't work. Your feelings, which I respect personally, but here, why would something be missing, and what is the relationship to the lack, which we're also discussing implicitly? What is lacking and so on. So start one more time, and I won't persecute you any further.
Oh, this is fantastic.
Oh, okay. I will persecute you.
I welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the permission. You see, I got a waiver here. That was almost a legal transaction. It's on tape that I got permission. I asked for permission. I sought permission to continue to do what I see as my work here, which is to teach you how to truly ask the question that you want answered, or maybe it's something else you're asking. And so we have our allegorical ears as well, because perhaps we're being asked something that's not, because let's note the language of his question. Is it Nima or Ima?
Nima.
Nima. Okay, because Ima in Hebrew is moment. So I'm like, oh, hi, Mom. Uh-oh. So Nima, very good. So Nima asks a question because he feels something is missing. Really? When is something, I could say, when is something not missing? Or isn't the missing piece or the lack, as in psychoanalysis, the very thing that motivates desire, conversation, language? If something were not missing, we wouldn't be here. We're always working around the abyss of what is missing. We're throwing cables over that missing link or part. And I need you to come on time. That's part of the contract that we're signing, okay? Because it does disrupt me, and I'm not a television, even though I asked to be treated as one. Okay, Nima, let's do another approach. So you're feeling sorry. Personally, I'm interested, but not here as a thinker. So you could also do a will to power move, which is to say, to frame the question in terms of your need. You know, you want us to be talking about Derrida's hospitality, right now.
No.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
No. Well, if we want to, but that's not what we're about.
Okay, so let's try again.
I wonder if, in addition to the contract, especially since we're invited for this to be an experimental space, there's another, beyond the implicit content of the contract, there's also the regulation of the hospitality.
Very nice.
Forces us to gravitate, or invites us, pulls us to gravitate around another coding.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not certain about that.
Okay, and that is a very legitimate and well-articulated question, Alan. I appreciate it. We will return to it because the question is hospitality, which was brought up last night. What does it mean to invite someone to speak? What does it mean when people start leaving or arrive whenever they want? Isn't that a violation of something and of the person's integrity as they try to speak and teach and so on? So to what extent does hospitality even have relevance in our encounter. This is something that we will discuss now. I'm putting it on the menu. It's very essential. Derrida's thinking of unconditional hospitality is something that we will want to consider, and the way we welcome the stranger, the immigrant, the alien other, and the alien unsaid, even the alien, what seems alien and undigestible. How do we welcome it? How do we hold it? How do we hold a space open for it without, let's say, murderous judgment or verdict? Just allowing it to occur, understanding that it can't occur in the present anyway. If you shut the door on something or someone, that gives the impression that you have understood. And that's not clear. That's not clear. Or that you don't want to understand. So we want to consider what the laws of hospitality are and whether they pertain to an experimental site.
I'm John, by the way. First of all, just to qualify, I'm completely unfamiliar with Derrida, so I'm starting with a little bit of a...
That's fair. I'm glad you say so.
But that's why I want to ask for just a clarification, really, on the unconditional hospitality idea as a kind of open space. Am I understanding that right? As an open space where we can have some kind of otherness, but the unconditional is conditioned by a contract. Is that right?
This is you already understand Derrida and know him. So, of course, there's no substitute for reading, but that's exactly the problem. Derrida asks us to imagine what we really need, which is a practice of unconditional hospitality. But that would mean opening the door to monstrosity, because if it's unconditional, you don't even ask the name of who busts into your home. Now, can you even offer hospitality? Okay, let's talk about this for a moment. And thank you, John, for the honesty of the question. What are the preconditions of even offering hospitality? Doesn't it mean, as in Kant, in his work on cosmopolitanism, that you first need to have a chez soi, your own home? Like, am I in a position to offer you hospitality in this place? It's not my property or my papa or my own most dwelling. Can I offer? I mean, that might be totally illegitimate and already like thievery. Am I stealing a space and giving the impression that it's my own? Because doesn't hospitality, first of all, imply that you have a place that you own from which you can then open up and offer? So that's already a question for Derrida. From which place can you even offer hospitality, first of all? And who gets to offer it? It's usually, and then he points out there's already a hierarchy. You offer hospitality because you're endowed with some property and richesse and wealth. And let's say the asymmetrical relationship might be of a landowner, a property owner, to a beggar. So that's already a problem. What's the relationship of the one to the other? Then you're absolutely right. If we were to imagine unconditional hospitality, and he says unconditional hospitality, which we need to imagine, that would mean that someone can bust into your space and you don't ask, even asking their name is already a violation. Like, who are you? Show me your papers. What is do you have a visa? Do you have a green card? Do you have the right to be here? Absolute unconditional hospitality, which we need to offer. It may be unthinkable, in fact. And yet, all of Western and Eastern, especially Eastern, history depends on a thinking of hospitality with its aporias. Do you know what aporia means, everyone? Good. So then the question that you raised comes in, which is even imagining that absolute hospitality were possible, in order for it to exist or be implemented, isn't it dependent on some regulatory system? Therefore, it's always conditioned. And we will go further. So you do know Derrida, because your question was very Derridian already. You jumped ahead. And then Derrida will really deconstruct hospitality, hostility, hospital, and show where care gets certain of its manifestations and where it turns out to not have ever been practiced, like forgiveness. So maybe we should, today I'm taking a scan, maybe we should have a session on forgiveness in Derrida and hospitality, so you understand how it's going.
I'm Ben.
Hi Ben, and then Nico.
This may be like a deeper by way of homonym, but it's something that keeps like repeating itself to me. And we're talking about contracts and takings in, and hospitality in hospitals, and I keep hearing contract is to contract a disease, is to take in this thing that you don't know if you're taking in, and you have this anxiety about taking in that will arrive later if it happens. And that sense of it, in relation to the hospital, and this, as this thing that like invades us through spaces and through holes that we don't know we have and things like that, that then infects us and becomes us and embodies us, and we whatever we have this like relation with it. So I don't know.
See, Ben is very shrewd. He's listening on certain levels, and if he weren't so clever, I would have slapped him down and said, what is this free association? But it's not, because in fact he's reading another register of what I'm saying and what was not available to me, and for which I have to thank him, because indeed I've been obsessed intellectually and otherwise with autoimmune structures of thought, learning, what invades, what infects, all sorts of histories of medicine and a Nietzschean thought of medicine that I've tried to open up. So you're absolutely right to have heard that register that wasn't available to me at this moment, which is to say that we're also talking about that which invades, including learning. It may be that the only way to learn is by some sort of traumatic intrusion. It may be that you need to be shaken up, violated, brought down, and negated in such a way that things then start maybe building up or something starts happening. I'm just saying that that is a very possible aspect or wing of edipedagogy, which is to say that true learning can only be accomplished to traumatic, let's say, to a traumatic destruction, and being invaded, having a relation to a foreign object. Again, you can throw it up, you can decide, I'm not going to eat that, I'm not going to swallow it. In American parlance, it got translated to, I'm not going to buy that, but it's not for sale. The question is, to what extent are we also always talking about immunodeficiency, immunocompetence? This is something that I've tried to set up, and now I'm saying it too quickly, but it's part of the reading protocols that I'm interested in discussing with you and developing for you. I threw myself into a mode of performativity, sheer performativity, and it had the supplement of seduction of saying this is done in sheer illegitimacy, which is to say any assertion or positing of power or the right to take the word, to prendre la parole, or to have the word, to have the floor, take the floor, is in it. There was a lot of irony, and that's what I want to get to. The irony of my promissory note to you, and the irony of that performance last night was that I said, I'm illegitimate, but therefore I created, I reproduced any assertion of sovereignty which begins illegitimately and violently, which is, again, I took up a space, but there's a lot to read into that. Why did I was struggling, because I thought the thing was doing fine. Do we really need someone to lead always? Do we need leaders? Do we need someone to take control? Was I being a control freak? I also knew that if I were to stand up, I would get overstimulated and not sleep, and today would be compromised. So I was in a very bound up in a neurotic knot of my contractual obligations to you today. I said, holy shit, if I get up and start, jamming on something and protecting and fixing and, then maybe I'm reneging on my contract to you. So you're dealing with a great neurotic here. So I have to tell you how many contracts went in and out. I had a whole corporation of lawyers in here negotiating for me. And I was resisting, and I said, holy fuck, I'm sitting here right next to him. So do I have a position? Don't I? Can I just let it happen? Let Vincenzo talk for 4 more hours? Am I being a control freak? What is my responsibility? What do I have to respond, or can I, for once in my life, just kick back and watch this thing disintegrate, have a good time? A hysteric, which I also am. I'm introducing myself to you too. A hysteric loves when trouble happens. Loves to make revolution and stir trouble. So I was in heaven, everything's fucked up, everyone's miserable, there's a major nervous breakdown happening. Was Victor even, I thought he went into high gear and trying to defend himself. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know him that well. But once you start talking diegetics and so on, you feel like, oh, here's the armor coming on. What do you guys need? What does the situation call for? And all of this has to do with what we're going to be reading tomorrow, which is the question of the call. Was I called? This is also an answer to the hospitality question. And this is a question of destination and destiny. Also of our, of Abraham, all of our father, our primal father. Was he called? Did he take the call? Yes, he did. Who called his name? We'll get to that because I'm going to read that via Kierkegaard and Kafka. In other words, and tomorrow we start up with Heidegger, for whom the call is thinking, or thinking is the call, taking the call. When do you disconnect or refuse the call? Or how do you know the call is aimed at you or calling you? How do you know your name is called? But your name is being called. That is your name. Your name is being called. That is your existence and your Dasein and your ontological status. You are being called. That's why I'm asking, what are you called? And you started with, well, my parents. So what do you answer to? Whom do you answer to? Should you answer a call to arms? Everything that gets transmitted has the fundamental structure of being called and targeting your being called. You are being called. That's who you are, being called. My name is being called. So, all of the corporative, like saying, no, sit down, yes, you're being called. Is it my name? Is it my function? Is it? And no one called on me. Wolfgang didn't make an arrangement with me. He didn't say, you take over or you do this. And then I thought that which is the higher calling or duty? It's a question of moral, something like moral, but not quite. It's responsibility. Do I respond? How do I respond is the call being even put out? People seem happy to talk and chat. Like, there is a problem about mishearing a call. Like Mr., I don't know if you remember him, George Bush, kept on hearing himself called by God to do certain things, like destroy the world. But so was Abraham. He was called to destroy Isaac. So when you're called, you're also called to be destroying something, to stop something. And that's a violence, and you have to have this infinite calculation, and this is what Derrida calls undecidability. It's not like I made the right decision, but undecidability is crazy making. It's maddening. I had 5,000 lists of pro and con going on, and then you just cut in and say, I will do this, but without legitimacy. Undecidability doesn't mean that decision has taken place. It means that you couldn't make a decision, and you jump in. You take the call, not being sure it was meant for you. Anyone needed you to take the call. If you didn't mess things up further, which I may have, I don't know. You have no control over it, and you don't even know if your name is being called, even though your name is being called. So I felt what I did was I offered thanks to the speaker. I simulated the right to be hospitable, which isn't my right. I'm also a guest here, you know. But who knows what kind of calculations. And then I invoked, as you said, I drew up a contract that this should have been our first encounter as a group, and that it should not be simply dismissed. I didn't want to hurt Victor's feelings by saying it was a failure, but failure is okay. But I kind of said that.
But answering call, but you called upon contract that we've been talking about a little bit, that were in the background, that you called upon your authority as a teacher, as a professor, as the person perhaps with the most intellectual clout in the room, and then we were called upon then to recognize that. No one stood up and said, look, this is bullshit, I have as much right to talk, or I have as much to, or Vincenzo did not say, no, actually, let's continue with my endless monologue. Now
this is what I'm working on right now, which is how authority gets posited, and the absolute illegitimate performance of authority, that there was a takeover moment, which is also a problem because Larry said to me, now you're going to be in charge of certain things that you know, who needed it, right? So in terms of, you've established your authority, you violently kind of took over and inserted yourself and made yourself the authority. But this is part of what I'm working with and thinking about. So, John, did you?
Oh, yeah. I was interested that you phrased it in terms of I didn't have the right to offer hospitality. How do you mean? Is right? You didn't have the right. Is this rights as in contractual rights?
That is very good. A good question. I heard myself say that too. So what confers? Maybe it is, and that already undermines hospitality. Maybe it is a question of who has the right. Maybe, you know, and who is outside of the realm of rights. And that's a problem too, because you offer hospitality to the one who is not enjoying privilege or the givenness of rights. So that's an issue as well. So let me just wrap this first part of our encounter so we can take a break and say that there is an irony of last night's performative assertion of my power to host, or to all I did was read. I wanted to model, by the way, that this could be read, because he was talking about, I mean, his super title was How to Leave the theater, or, right? So I wanted to show how, on some level, he programmed. Now, this may have been wrong in some way, but what I did want to show allegorically was the supremacy of our decision to read together, and that this should not escape our responsibility to each other, to ourselves, to read what occurs, to read a history as it's being broken or made, and to read our mid-sign at the moment that something disintegrated and presented itself by not presenting itself, but by coming radically illegible or too legible. Maybe both guns walking out was too readable, and that's what hurt the speaker. If it were more ambiguous, we would have been in a different space, and I wouldn't have felt called. It wasn't ambiguous enough. So I wanted to reintroduce the dressing of ambiguity, of the imperative to read, and not to think that we understood what happened last night, neither in terms of the lecture nor in terms of the performance of every party. So let me explain that the irony of the promissory note that I have offered you now about 6 times, you will have understood, is involved in speech act theory. Do you know what that is? Do you know the difference between constitutive and performative speech acts? You need to know that, and I'm pleased with your honesty. So